So it sounds like the more we talk, the more I'm sitting here thinking, not only to be a good neurologist, you need to be a great like question. You need to know what questions to ask, right? Because it's
Sure.
all about the diagnosis.
Hmm.
That's why they come to you. But I'm assuming the more you do it, the better you get at it,
Yeah,
and
that's
you
true.
could become much more efficient.
That's true. Yeah.
You could like rule things out much quicker.
Right.
Interesting. So the goal would be to go to like a really old neurologist who's been doing it for 70 years.
You know, maybe, but at the same time, not to toot my own horn, but older neurologists, like the older, not just neurologists, but I think doctors in general, the older they are, the less, it's not, of course, universal across the board, but the older doctors, they're sort of used to what they're trained in. And even myself, I admit, you're only as good as how your training was. So if you've been trained 50 years ago where you didn't have all these advances, you may not be thinking about what other options you can give your patient unless you're one of those doctors who's very involved in, and hopefully you are somebody who's into what's the newest thing out there. And that's when it's kind of nice to be sort of involved with industry in a sense, because when you allow, let's say representatives from pharmaceutical companies come by, they can sometimes educate doctors who are like, oh yeah, that's right, there's this disorder, and you learn about this. And also you might be able to, you should hopefully be able to learn also just reading journals, because we do have to do continuing medical education. But, in the private practice world, it's not, it's not always doable because time commitments and everything else. So it's nice to be able to keep your head to the ground and always be in touch with what's new out there, and also not just treatments, also just disease states. There's something we're always, and that's one of the things I like about neurology, is because something I learned 10 years ago might not be true as much anymore. And so you're like, oh, okay, great, now we know that this does this. Like, for example, certain risk factors for things like ALS, right? Lou Gehrig's disease. More and more data comes out. We know that certain exposure to certain chemicals might predispose somebody to have ALS. Not necessarily 100%. But, for example, like one of the things we recently learned is people who have been exposed to embalming fluid.
What's that?
People who work with cadavers, like in mortuaries and stuff when they have to prepare the body.
Got it.
They're at a slightly higher risk of developing Lou Gehrig's, for example.
Whoa.
Yeah, or people who have been exposed to certain type of chemicals in gas, gasoline type of thing, like military aircraft, for example, or possibly a little bit more prone to certain things, not just ALS, but even things such as Parkinson's, for example.
Whoa,
So,
and this data is just recently coming out.
it's been coming out throughout, here and there sporadically, but there's always more and more other researchers who look retrospectively and try to collect population data to try to see if there's a correlation between a certain disease state and exposure to certain things. It's not always easy, obviously, because there's always confounding factors. But if you have a good sort of academic center with good statisticians and academicians, they may be able to interpolate what's going on. But forget about also causes, also like, pathways, mechanisms. For example, in the world of migraines, in the last 10, 20 years, we learned that there's a certain pathway, for example, the calcitonin gene-related peptide pathway, where you get, or the reason why you feel the pain you feel when you have a migraine or even a headache. There's certain chemicals, like calcitonin gene-related peptides, that get released by certain parts of your midbrain, your brainstem, and that sort of starts the whole process. So because we knew the pathway, or the scientists figured out the pathway, they knew what type of chemicals you can apply or medications you can try to stop it from happening. So now we have a new generation of anti-migraine medications. They're like, for example, once-a-month injectables,
Wow.
which have been game changers. Before that, we had mostly off-label oral medication somebody had to take every day, twice a day or once a day, depending on the medication. And now we have what we call the anti-CGRP antibodies. I'm going to mention some specific brands like Ajovy, Emgality, Aimovig, which are been, phenomenal game changers when it comes to prevention of headaches. Just because we figure out what the mechanism, we sort of fine tune it and we figure out a little bit more in detail what's going on at the pathway level and what can we do to stop the headaches.